Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. Today's guest is Scott King of Ontario, Canada. For today's episode, Scott chose to discuss a show for which we both have attendance bias. February 22nd, 2003 at the US Bank Arena in Cincinnati, Ohio. The February 2003 tour was a very special time to be a Phish fan. During the band's 18-month hiatus, dozens of jam bands gained prominence and began to specialize in specific genres that were generally popularized by Phish to jam band fans. Ironically, because of the rise of the scene, Phish's absence made them more popular for when they returned. And when they did return for this winter tour, anticipation was at an all-time high, and Phish delivered. They offered all-time career highlight jams and shows in this brief 12-show tour. Today's guest, Scott, was going through a transformative time in his life, and being Canadian, he did not usually get the opportunity to see Phish that often. But sometimes the stars line up, and he was able to see a few shows on this memorable tour. And this second night of a 2-show run in Cincinnati during a rainy weekend would be a healing time when he was going through a pretty tough patch. So let's join Scott to talk about barbecue Frito twists, walls of the cave, filling up your gas tank as we discuss Phish's show from February 22nd, 2003 at the US Bank Arena in Cincinnati. Scott, welcome to Attendance Bias.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I've wanted to talk about this show for years, literally decades now at this point. So I'm thrilled that you chose it. But to get the audience clued in, you chose Phish's performance from February 22nd, 2003 at what was then called the US Bank Arena in Cincinnati, a rainy, cold, sleet-filled weekend. And I can't wait to talk about it, but this is your show. So we'll get into it in just a second during Phish's return from their first hiatus. But to get to know you a little bit, let's get started with the Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
Attendance Bias Lightning Round.
So, Scott, when was your first Phish show and what do you remember from it?
Okay, so my first Phish show is August 15th, 1998, day one of Lemon Wheel. I'd gotten into Phish about 3 years before that. I'd say 95. I think within 2 weeks, got a copy of Hoist and a live one handed to me. I was already somewhat on the jammy train at that point. I liked my Grateful Dead, but hadn't really dipped the toe in the pond yet. Missed an opportunity to see them in 96 in Detroit, and then got an opportunity to teach in Korea in the early part of 1997. And so while everybody I know was heading to the Great Went, I was, getting used to kimchi and other delicacies over in Korea. But by that time, I'd taken some tapes with me. I actually found a dude to trade tapes with in Korea, which was pretty cool. We were starting to get some of the summer of 97 tours coming in. I timed it. Well, I don't know whether I timed it or not, but the universe timed it so that when I got back, Lemon Wheel was going to be my first show. And almost didn't make it. Unfortunately, my grandmother passes away on our way out. We literally turned the van around, came back, went to the funeral. My dad gave me his blessing and said, no, if you can make this, do this. And so I'm from London, Ontario, which is halfway between Detroit and Toronto. So we drove through the night and we got there. And, by the time Mike's song played that first note, I had tears running down my face. And there I was in the middle of it all. It was fantastic.
Do you remember what your first Phish moment was? Like how you first, was it through the Grateful Dead? Because you said you were listening to them ahead of Phish.
Yeah, for sure. So unfortunately, I never got a chance to see the Dead. Again, I was jam adjacent at that point. Had a few boots, was sort of making my way into that world. But I was also coming from that time from a pretty heavy rock grunge background. But I was really sort of fascinated by what was going on in that world. And then it really didn't take that long for me to fall in love. It really was sort of love at first sight. So it was great.
And what's your overview memory of Lemon Wheel and its legacy? I only ask it because I have this thought that almost every Phish festival has its own personality, and Lemon Wheel's kind of the middle child that gets skipped over when you look back at the legacy of Phish. Like the Clifford Ball was the first big time. Yep. The Great Went is unquestionably, in my opinion, one of the best musically speaking. Big Cypress is a world of its own. Even It in 2003, or Oswego, right? They have their own mega personalities, but Lemon Wheel, people just kind of take it for granted. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different view because you were there?
No, I totally agree. And I think we're going to see, and I might even be talking about this elsewhere, but we're going to see a real renaissance for Lemon Wheel next summer when we hit the anniversary, which it'll be, 25 years. And I think a lot of people are going to dig back in at that point. I think, obviously, another attendance bias, but I think there's some great playing in those shows. I think there's a lot of fun stuff that happened at Lemon Wheel for people to kind of dig back into. It doesn't sort of have your wet gin or whatever may have you, but some of the playing and certainly some of the sets, and of course the ambient jam, if that's your thing, which it was for me, and one of my all-time top Phish memories of lying in a sea of candles and just listening to my favorite band bliss out. It was phenomenal. So I think Lemon Wheel does get overlooked. Not as, like, you want to talk about the redheaded stepchild. I think Oswego really kind of gets a bad rep that way, but I would put Lemon Wheel way above it from a music standpoint. And I would invite anybody to go back and check out those tapes if they're looking for a great summer vibe, because there's some great playing in there.
What's your most recent show, and what did you think of it?
Yeah, so most recent show was June 18th, 2019 in Toronto. I am a Canadian, as some of your listeners may have picked up by the accent. We'll see whether we get that in the comments or not. But I don't think I have an accent. Everybody else does. Not the show this summer, but there were some things that were cool there. The stash was a really nice stash, and really happy to hear that played. It was the first Ruby Waves, which I predicted would have a big future. And turns out there was at least one more significant version of that played that summer. And hometown shows are always really special, especially for Canadian fans. I think one of the things we'll dip into is it's a little bit different being a Canadian fan than an American fan. Obviously, we have proximity if things are swinging through some of the Midwest or New York State, and lots of Canadian fans go all over the place, just like other fans. We just have a border to contend with that not everybody else does. And Toronto shows get kind of dumped on, but let me tell you, the 2000 show probably still stands as one of my favorites to go back to. We had the rained out show. I have an incredible record of having tickets to Phish shows that get canceled, of which there are not many, but Toronto and Curveball, top that list. But yeah, Toronto, it's almost a flyover, but I predict this summer, this is going to be the year that the Toronto show hits.
Well, I'm curious when you mentioned that about that Toronto fans or Canadian fans in general will travel anywhere. Whenever I talk to someone who lives in a place where Phish doesn't frequent that often, what is your radius? What is your travel radius? Is it by hours? Like how many hours you would travel to see Phish? Is it get on a plane? Like what is your general, it's too far, it's not too far?
That there is no too far for Canadian Phish fans or any fans for that matter, right? If you have the means, you will find the way. Especially now that we've started opening up the Mexican frontier, and we'll talk about the lightning round. I guess we're in the lightning round. I went to Big Cyprus, so that was obviously my biggest best. But my general radius is 8 hours is reasonable. I'm a father. I'm also a teacher, so like a lot of these things have to be sort of gauged around that. But, for example, this summer, Pine Knob for sure, Toronto, and then looking at Blossom, but see if we can fit it into the timetable. But if it's a weekend, maybe, all bets are off, kind of like the Cincinnati show, which was only about 6 hour drive.
Speaking along those lines, what's the farthest you've ever traveled to see Phish?
Yeah. So that was Big Cyprus, and that was an adventure. Eight of us jammed into a Winnebago, leaving in the middle of a Canadian winter to end up in a swamp 31 hours later. But what a time and what a memory. Just one of those tentpole moments, not just from a Phish perspective, but from a life perspective for me, and making it into that and being there for arguably one of the biggest shows they've ever done.
What is the band that you've seen the most other than Phish?
This is going to come off as awfully, terribly Canadian cliche, but it is the Tragically Hip. I have to say it. If there was another band that I was following around a lot in the 90s, and for those listeners that may not know, the Tragically Hip is probably one of the more premier Canadian rock bands, but not simply just rock. If you talk about the lead singer, especially Gord Downey, who unfortunately left us a few years ago, we're talking about an improvisational poet who absolutely was electric. And in the same way that Phish improvisationally keeps us coming back for more, you never saw the same version of some songs, especially, I'd highlight something like New Orleans is Sinking, where he would often go on a monologue, improvised poetic rant. So yeah, I'd seen the hip quite a bit, especially in the 90s. Other than that, Broken Social Scene, which was more of a regional thing. They just were around a lot and amazing, and you went to see them every time you could. And I'll just give a little teeny tiny plug for some Canadian jam music as well. There's the band called the Bert Nielsen Band, who at the sort of jam-a-sance of the late 90s, early aughts, was, I would argue, although there are many other very good bands, one of our more prominent Canadian jam bands. And I saw the Berts quite a bit.
What is your favorite post-show snack?
Oh yeah, this is awesome. I've been waiting to talk about this. So like, I don't want to call myself a snack tourist per se, but there are certain snack products that are only available in America and not available in Canada. And so it is always one of the great joys of prepping for any show to hit up your local Tops or whatever the local grocery store may be, and just take a walk down that snack aisle and see what's different or what's still there that you've loved before. I'm going to give a shout out right now to Frito barbecue twists. They're consistent. They've been around for a while. I can't get them here. I buy an extra bag or two every time I'm there. We were in Lewiston to see Goose a few weeks ago, and man, it was so good to be back in, hitting a show in the States and hitting up that American snack food aisle.
It's so funny you say that, because the grass is always greener. I went to college in Buffalo, so
Right.
I would go to Toronto or Hamilton to see shows every once in a while. String Cheese Incident, I remember I think it was in Toronto. I'll double check that. But to us, it was a big novelty to get Molson Triple X. And it's like, because they didn't have it yet for sale in the United States. They would eventually, but going to shows in Ontario almost exclusively, or going to Blue Jays games, stuff like that. It was we gotta go. We gotta get poutine. We gotta get Molson Triple X. We got, and so the biggest difference I thought is, well, you said going down the American snack food aisles, the big difference is calories almost exclusively. It's probably better for the rest of the world that there are some things you can only get in America.
True as you say, but it's always like the different, like I'm a salty guy. So like particularly chip flavors, like I'm a sucker for a new chip flavor anywhere that I go. You're really putting a very specific time stamp on yourself with the Molson Triple X though. That is a bygone era and a product that no longer exists anymore. But that's cool that you're from Buffalo. My wife grew up very close toward that in Port Colborne on the other side of the border.
But to wrap up the lightning round, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I love when you ask this question, because you just know in your listener's mind, there's like a million different like little micro incidences that you saw in a motel parking lot somewhere, or I think the weirdest stuff always happens at festivals. Like that's how I became a festival addict, was not just obviously the music, but just that traveling circus and how it all seems to land and make a city a weirdness. But for me, the weirdness that I like about Phish, or the thing that I always connect to it in sort of the general energy of the universe, is coincidences that happen. These unexplainable things that only seem to happen when you are at or on your way to or coming from a show, right? And so like we hooked up at that Lemon Wheel show that we talked about earlier with a group of folks from Michigan, who then became pretty constant traveling companions through the 90s. And actually we would meet up with at this show in Cincinnati. And we have like so many coincidence stories with them. One being like one of the guys lost his license at Oswego, needed to cross the Canadian border to come to the Toronto show that was happening just afterwards. We were actually going to host them up in Canada, and he was going to have to drive all the way back around to Michigan when they were from to grab ID. And we had stopped for gas, and literally in the parking lot of this gas station, which was just down from where Oswego was, some guy ran up to him and like held out his license to him and said, "Are you this man?" And he's like, "I am that man. Why do you have my license?" Right. And they literally just found it on the tarmac at Oswego, picked it up. It looked like one of their buddies. And he got our whole day changed at that point. Like we were just, huge celebration. And then it goes back, that same group of people, like we were looking at our pictures from Lemon Wheel. And then we were looking back at other pictures and they were looking back at pictures of the Great Went. And I wasn't there for that, but they looked in the background. They're like, hey, there's this guy and that guy. But that's impossible because we didn't meet them until 98. And then they realized that they had been raging beside the same group of people that we would connect with 1 year later, stood beside them for the whole show. They're in like 3 pictures. And yet the connection wouldn't be made until all those years later. It's wild, the coincidences sometimes that happen at these shows.
When was this show played?
So the 2003 tour was the band's return from their 18-month hiatus. It's probably, this is opinionated, of course, but it's probably their best tour in the 2.0 era. I prefer this one over the summer 2003 tour, although each obviously has their highlights. This one, though, the February 2003, is filled with all-time Phish shows. For the reputation it has, there were only 12 shows on this tour. And to boot, it was a winter tour, which is extremely rare these days, especially now, which, we don't get that anymore for the most part. Off the top of my head, I wasn't even thinking too hard about this. Some of the easy to name highlights from when you think winter 2003, Bathtub Gin from the tour opener in Los Angeles. There's a 5-song second set from night 1 in Vegas. There was another Segway Fest, night 2 in Vegas. These 2 nights in Cincinnati, we'll get a little more specific in a little bit. The odd BB King sit-in, which from everyone I've spoken to who was there, looks a lot better on paper than it did in person. I was not there, but that's what I've heard. The obvious all-time show at the Nassau Coliseum on the 28th. There was a whole episode on this podcast about that one with my friend Slade. And the tour closer on March 1st in Greensboro with the You Enjoy Myself into Proud Mary encore. And my memory of this was the insane anticipation. This was the first online Phish tickets by mail. And I remember not getting tickets for that New Year's Eve, 2002, 2003, Madison Square Garden comeback show. The tickets for that show felt impossible to me. And so there was a tremendous amount of pent-up demand. You mentioned earlier this kind of neo-jamband movement at the end of the 90s, early 2000s. I feel like so many more people got into Phish during their time off. There was this big vacuum of venues, like who's going to make that buck? And hundreds, it seemed, of bands rose up to get there, and kind of in a mirror reflection, so people got more into Phish. More people did, at least.
Yeah, this 03 represents a lot of people's first shows. There's a whole generation of 2.0 kids. I know for a fact that I remember because we used to have to call in our American tickets to Ticketmaster in the States, and being there on the phone with my friend while I was trying to get 221, he was trying to get 222, and just the joy and celebration when we managed to nail tickets to both. It was for us, New Year's was never going to be possible. Hampton was never going to be possible. But those Cincy shows sitting right there on a weekend, 2-night stand, it just all felt so right. And yeah, total joy and celebration when you get that person on the line. And remember talking to a human ordering tickets?
Oh, I used to keep Ticketmaster reps on the phone for an hour, just giving them names of different bands and different acts, and they would have to type in to see, did anyone have any scheduled shows coming up? There was, not everyone had their own website yet, especially older classic rock acts that were not as old back then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And so that's how I found out whether or not there were shows. Phish, of course, had their Doniak Schweiss, and their website was actually quite modern for the time. It was recently updated. So there was never any question with Phish. But yes, I do remember having to call in early, get the local phone number, not the 1-800 Ticketmaster number.
That's right. That's right.
To try and get tickets. So if they were playing a show in Cincinnati, you could call the New York Ticketmaster. That was kind of the secret at the time.
That's funny. Yeah. We used to call Michigan. That was our sort of closest to get to too. But yeah, good stuff.
Yeah, and it was what you just said, that this Cincinnati 2-night run, which was the 21st and 22nd of February, I went there for the same reason, because it sat on a weekend. And the other opportunity that my roommate and I at the time were looking at, I was in college at SUNY Buffalo at the time.
Mm-hmm.
We were looking at that Nassau Coliseum show a week later on the 28th, because that's where I'm from.
Right.
Originally, at least. And it would make a whole lot of sense to go down there. Free place to stay. My parents' house is literally minutes from the Nassau Coliseum. Everyone I knew would probably be there. But it was, I think, on a Wednesday. It was like right in the middle of the week. And it's an 8-hour drive. Mm-hmm. Maybe it wasn't. I got to double check that. But it's an 8-hour drive, basically, especially in February, from Buffalo to Long Island. Yeah. It's a long, long road. And and when we looked it up, Cincinnati was 7 hours. It was a little bit closer. Neither of us had been to Cincinnati at the time. And I don't know, there was something more adventurous about going to a new place you hadn't been before.
2-night runs, also, there's a certain magic to that as well. These days, they're more liable to stack back-to-back shows, but not as common back in those days as well. So anywhere where you got to stay put for a night always added a little bit of extra special. And I would argue maybe one of the best 2-night runs of that era.
Oh, certainly. I don't think that you're not going to get much of an argument back for that. So I remember from this weekend, my friend and I barely left the hotel room because it was so cold and nasty, raining, snowing, sleet everywhere. It just wasn't enjoyable to be outside, even though it was our first time in town. We actually stayed in Kentucky, right across the bridge.
So did we. I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that I could stay in Kentucky and go see a show in Cincinnati until we booked that. So yeah, that was kind of fun.
At the time, there was this unbridled enthusiasm and this optimism. First of all, they were playing really well, and just the big sense that Phish was back. We had no idea what would come roughly 12 months later, that it wouldn't be as exciting as it was in February. But there was this unbridled enthusiasm of, oh my God, we're going to see Phish. They have all this new music. What was your impression of the new 2.0 round room stuff?
So I liked it. I mean, I'm a round room truther. I like the warm nature of that recording. There's a looseness to it, of course, but I do like the material. I do defend the material. We're excited to see some new stuff. And overall, like you say, like it had been since 2000. And since that time, I mean, I did some pretty heavy touring in 99 and a couple shows in the aughts. But then after that, this whole jam band scene that I was in, Phish was gone, but Trey Band was there. And, I'd gone to Deer Creek and Columbus to see Trey Band and like all this stuff. And I was as heavy into jam band music at that point as I had ever been in my entire life. And so when the announcement came that they were coming back and these shows, the energy in that room was just, to this day, still one of the most purely joyful, right off the hop, give it right everything you've got from start to finish, just pure celebration mode. I do have similar memories about the weather and I mean, we're Canadian, so you won't hear us complain about the weather that much, but there is something about that gray, wet, like we stuck pretty close to the hotel, but it was so good to, like, there was a lot of different scenes coming together for me there. There was all these Canadian jam band kids that I was hooking up with that I'd never been to a Phish show with because I'd met them in the subsequent years leading up. There was old tour friends that we were meeting from all over the States that were, helping us out and setting us up with all the things that one needs when one has to cross a border. And the border got crazy at that point too. Like, I don't know if you remember this, but post 9/11,
I do.
The Canadian border, I mean, it was always a bit of a challenge, but we got stopped going to a Trey show. And like the question at the border was, I can't help but notice that you all have beards.
Wow, really?
Long pause. And like, so there was this whole just era of like, okay, no more stuffing stuff in our socks anymore. We gotta tighten it down. So anyway, we met up with friends and everything sort of came together. No real lot seemed to speak of. We almost ran out of gas. That was hilarious because apparently I found out on the way there that my gas meter was broken and that it should have gone all the way to the E as opposed to not quite to the E, but we sputtered in. I traveled there with the guy that I'd seen that first Lemon Wheel show with and the guy that turned me on to Phish. who had just broken up with his girlfriend, but decided that he was going to bring her anyway. I thought that was kind of weird, except now they're married and have 3 kids and everything worked out. So maybe, Phish had a small part to play with that. I just met my girlfriend at the time, 6 weeks before, who is now my wife and I have children with. And so, it was a weird show, kind of getting there for the tour, the trip. But once we got there and settled in, all the friendly faces, all of it started to come back. And we were ready to get down. That's for sure.
So why do you have attendance bias toward this show? Why did you pick it?
For a couple of reasons. Same as you say, 21, it was just kind of a checklist. You're like, yes, 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 yes. And it's your first show back. So you're after a while. So of course you have that sort of enthusiasm. I think both the fans and the band had a really good night on the night of the 21st. I think everybody came into night 2 pretty foggy, rather groggy. And, and there's that sort of that energy in there too. I couldn't remember. I was trying to hunt this down before the show. I think it was during one of Trey's solo acoustic shows that he told a story about him and Paige in Cincinnati, and the fire alarm going off at their hotel. And
that was the 21st. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, so, the band had a special time on that 2-night stand for sure. And it just, the whole thing had a party. But the reason I gravitated, when you asked me which one of the 2 I wanted to do, there are like 3 very awesome 2.0 moments there that I just think not enough people have dove into. Like everybody else, I worship at the church of 228 every year. What's going to be on my stereo on that day. But these shows, like if the buy-in wasn't there before, man, boom, instant buy-in then. And then on a personal note, this maybe the theme of this whole thing is kind of good times, bad times, but I got diagnosed with cancer 2 days later. On the 24th. Not that I was planning on seeing any other shows that tour. I remember that time with such absolute clarity as you do around these times. And I really held on to those shows as a boy in a very, very dark time in stormy seas. And music saves my life in more ways than one. But at that point, that definitely was one of those things that I could reach back to in my darkest moments and say, okay, there are good times ahead. Your favorite band's back together. You're going to see live music again eventually. I did hit it later that summer. I'd gotten through all my treatments and I'd completed my, radiation, and I was back, and it was actually very manageable for me. And that was fantastic. So I had a lot of optimism in my own life, despite that sort of darker time. And I had a lot of optimism for Phish at that point. It's just, I can see 2003 with such clarity.
Set 1.
The first set opens with The Sloth, which is a big opener. You could hear the crowd going nuts. I remember exactly where I was. I was on the lower level, straight back from the stage. Okay. And I remember this big, big explosion. This is the first time I saw The Sloth live. The quality of the audience recording that I used to prepare for this talk isn't very good. It's very boomy. I feel like that was generally the sense of summer 2003 before people had the ability to remix at home, before Pro Tools and such, whatever audio, Audacity, whatever sort of programs existed. But you can hear that this is the first opportunity for most Midwest fans, other than the show at Allstate Arena in Illinois, to see Phish. That everyone was back for the party. And there's a big breakthrough about 3.5 minutes in. It's encouraging. It's like I wrote in capital letters, Phish is back. And they were able to kind of master these complicated Zappa type changes that hailed all the way back to their earliest days. I feel like these complicated parts getting nailed was kind of rare toward the end of 1.0. So this just kind of stoked the optimism of what was to come in 2.0. We didn't know.
Yes, we certainly didn't, and complicated might have flown out the window sooner than we had expected. But so when I took a listen back, getting ready for this, and I've probably listened to it a couple of times via the live Phish app. So the soundboard, you can still hear so many times in this show, audience pops straight through, right? Just like boom, it's palpable. You can hear it in the band. The proficiency was there. I lost the bet that they were going to open with the Wikipog, although it would surface later. It's a great buy-in tune, right? Old and new fans alike. You're in.
Yeah, I agree. Buy-in tune is a great way to phrase it. And the next one, the follow-up, Dog Stole Things, is also a buy-in tune. It's fairly rare. It's very basic, right? Big piano solo, big guitar solo. We're in, we're out. Kind of like Jesus Left Chicago in that sense. It has that same idea. It was the tone. This is when I first noticed that Trey's tone is a little different than it was throughout most of 1.0. It's a little bit more brash. It's a little harsher. It's not drastically different yet, but this was a good 1-2 punch to open the show, and everyone is still just floating in complete joy at being back at a Phish show.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love as much as I tolerate dogs. I have a special place in my heart for it because it was on a Great Went tape that I wore thin, at one point in time of my life. But yeah, you're right. As far as brand recognition and okay, here's Dog Stole Things. This is a song probably not a lot of people have seen or heard. Rarity. I'm sure I wasn't booing it at the time or anything like that. I'll sing along just like everybody else. Again, you talk about that 1-2 punch of they didn't try to throw a new song in there. They didn't try to and again, this is night 2, right? So what can they bring to the table? How are they going to surprise us? The eternal surprise that always keeps us coming back. A sloth Dog Stole Things opener. Yeah, that'll do the trick for sure.
And more, talk about surprises coming right up. Piper is, or it would become one of the big jam monsters of 2.0. You kind of knew, I would say by the end of this tour, whenever you heard Piper start, you were in for at least 15 minutes. Like there was a big jam coming. And this is a monster jam. There's a big cheer at around 3 minutes once the jam really gets started. And this is kind of my first, other than maybe the 2001 or Down with Disease from the previous night, what I would consider kind of my first taste of 2.0. A little bit looser, a little bit less coherent. I don't know, a little bit less tight, but still Fishman would hold it together with the drum beat. He never went too far off. He was always your center.
First of all, first set Piper, you're just hoping and praying that it's not short and it's not, underutilized. But like you say, Piper wasn't really, it was a jam vehicle at that point, but not the sort of swirling chaos that it's going to become in 2003 when it really digs in. I guess I just have a memory. I don't know whether I've implanted it or whether it's just kind of the whole show in general, but I was kind of like you. I was in the lower bowl, back from the stage, great shot of the lights and the whole crowd, and just everyone getting down hard early, and those looks that you just give one another when like Paige pulls out a new keyboard sound, you're like, what was that? Or like Trey growling guitar and you're like, dirty Trey, what are you doing to it? There was new sonic things being explored there, and like you say, not necessarily tight, but just this soundscape, this sound wash that was coming over you, and undeniable energy as the band pushed it harder and harder and harder. and this is sort of our last era of, I won't say total machine gun Trey, but of super fast Trey pushing those fingers and picking hard, into those notes. And Page is playing with some new keyboard sounds in this too. I wasn't able to sort of mentally identify what he was using there, but like there was a lot of new sounds coming at us, and it went so long and we were so happy.
Yeah, and everyone else got super happy soon enough, because this is, I think, the first time it ever happened. Piper segued directly into Weekapaug Groove to kind of close out the Mike song from the 21st, the night before. I have to double check Phish.net, but I think this is the first time that Weekapaug was played on its own outside of Mike's song.
Right. I think there might have been a 93, but I'll let you put that in the at the end.
I'm excited to find out.
Yeah. But also, we were waiting for it, and it's not just a throwaway segue either. It's right there. They are flying. Poor Mike, like, just dig in, like, because we've seen this happen before. It's not the first time that they brought back Weekapaug at a clipping pace, but it's coming off the energy of that Piper, and they are just hucking it.
Yeah, I wonder if my thought is that Trey, especially, or the band, knew that they were going to stuff Weekapaug somewhere in this show. And maybe they were just kind of having it on the side of their brain, collective brain, where it's like, all right, where can we do it? Once the opportunity comes up, we have to pounce. I don't think they necessarily planned for it to be Piper into Weekapaug, but someone, I think Trey starts it, those chords, and someone, kind of said, all right, this is an opportunity. Let's go for it. And it's a very democratic Weekapaug groove. There's no lead, which is unusual, because usually it's either Trey on guitar, almost always, or Page on piano leading the way, or organ. And I didn't really hear a lot of that here. It's really spread out, which I really love.
Yeah, it's cool that way. The other thing about the Pog segue is always finding a key, or finding your way to the key of Weekapaug,
right?
Which is I should have looked this up beforehand, but it's not a standard or easy key to find your way to. Something tells me either Mike's or it is an F, and so you can't naturally find your way there from a lot of other songs. So there must have been something that they did during the Piper Jam, because it's the segue is very, very, very smooth from a melodic standpoint. But yeah, it does. It gets kind of quieter near the end, and it's not that it runs out of gas, but it little hints of that spacey ambient stuff that they had played with before.
Yeah, that would become much more common as the 2.0 era would go on. After that, they played Dirt, which is kind of a much needed cool down. Nothing exceptional, nothing less than good. It just, we kind of needed it. We all needed a breather by then. And then after that is Scent of a Mule, which is the first time I ever heard it live. And I remember thinking, this is what I'm missing by not being there, by listening to it on tape. There really is a lot of theatricality, or there could be theatricality to this song that doesn't really resonate when you're listening to it without being there.
Yeah, I miss Scent. And that's not a common, that'll be my unpopular Phish take, even though I didn't get asked that question. But I do, because somewhere along the way, it just wasn't cool anymore to be that goofy and sing a little bluegrass ditty and have a little, mule duel in the bit. But when I think back of my earliest memories and things that helped me buy into this band, especially live, like you say, it's fun. They are having fun up there. And that's something they used to have a lot of fun doing. It's interplay between Mike and Paige, which isn't always the easiest thing for them to attain. And again, my first Phish is Hoist. So there's a nostalgia piece to that too. I bring back Scent. I'd love to see some of the newer kids get that sort of fun moment in their show.
Yeah, I remember Fishman leaning over the front of his drum set and playing a drum roll with his sticks on the front of his bass drum.
Yeah.
To start. And yeah, you're right. It's immaturity, such as it is, but it's like very well-crafted immaturity is essential to the Phish experience. And Scent of a Mule displays that for sure. And just like that, we're close to the end of the first set, not quite there, but close, where they play Walls of the Cave, which I've said it a billion times on this podcast, was not a huge fan of as it came out. I have some deep-seated problems with this song, although this version is often considered one of the best ever.
We have to talk about this. I'm a Walls of the Cave backer. There's always been something about, especially the back end of that song when Fishman gets his like,
the silent trees.
The silent trees, the Tomorrow Never Knows, whatever you want to call it, right? It's that beat and it's just so driving. Now, again, instrument bias. I'm a drummer. One of the things I play, and so I just always love the rhythm of that and the harmony of it. Thematically, I mean, we could always argue about, Walls of the Cave thematically and where it plays into the whole post-September 11th world and that kind of stuff. But that night, to hear Walls of the Cave as one of my favorite tracks from Round Room and then have it go as long as it did. It's way longer than I remember, by the way. Way long. Like way longer. And it's not a really go anywhere jam, because like a lot of the times you play something for the first time, you try to take it for a walk, you stay on the same path. So it's not typically innovative, but it'll make the jam chart, I'm sure. But I haven't heard of Walls like it since. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and it's not the Walls of the Cave that we know now. All the pieces are there. It's not radically different, but it's like there's a second jam. It starts at 8 minutes, when today, if we heard it last night, for example, that would be closing the song. But it actually quiets down. It gets more laid back than usual. It's unusual for Walls of the Cave. If they played this version from the 22nd last night, it would be heralded as completely unique. Technically, it's a type 1 jam, but it at every moment seems poised to break out and experiment. Like it's building, but not to any sort of intense or insane level, just going in all directions at once. I mean, at 15 minutes, we're at a full-on jam, but it's not very melodic. And then it's really fun because by the end, they come back to listen to the silent trees, which they don't do anymore.
and well at that. So Mike and Fishman are really sort of locked in this kind of rhythmic drive. And then they nail it. They nail the landing. And if this was the modern era, we'd be waiting for the lights to come up for set break at that point, right? But it wasn't that song yet. And we still got a couple more to go.
Right. Next up is Mountains in the Mist, which is another slow ballad, kind of taking the place of Dirt, or at least doing the providing the same service that Dirt did earlier in this show. Another rarity that we don't hear that often. And then they close with Sample in a Jar.
Yeah. And I got to package this one together again in the sentimentality attendance bias way. My friend, I'm going to give him a name call here, Mike Tomasi. He's the guy that we got into Phish together. We did all these shows together for the Bittersweet Motel screening in our town. We did a solo acoustic show, him and I, and we learned Mountains in the Mist and covered that as a rarity for that night, because how you can impress heads but play something from the Japanese version of Farmhouse that doesn't get played that often. And then Sample in a Jar was like note one of the first songs that we ever kind of bonded over this band. So like we must have hugged each other 17 times in that Mountains and Sample in a Jar. For us, you couldn't have tailor-made a better ending to a first set for a show that we loved.
Set 2.
The second set opens with Tube. I wrote at my first note is this Tube is probably one of the best they've ever played. Nowadays, there's been a number of really great versions in later 3.0, at least the second half of it, I would guess that we're in. I remember for the beginning of 3.0, Tube kind of reverted back to this 4.5 minute pacemaker song that like, all right, we need a little filler. Let's play Tube. But starting with maybe around the Baker's Dozen, they started expanding it again. And there have been great versions that live up to the late 1.0 era. And this one, the beginning of 2.0, it almost immediately gained a reputation as one of the 10-pole jams of this tour. It's a superlative version.
Yeah. What a buy-in song. Like, it's instant dance party. This is 2003 in a nutshell, and how they were going to play the crowd for that second set. Get them dancing, get them grooving. I was a little hesitant when Phish came back. I'd heard the New Year's tapes and you know, obviously there was some warm-up jitters, but like when I heard this Tube, and I follow the Twitter handle Did Tube Jam.
Yeah.
This Tube jammed. It'll make a believe. Honestly, I think a lot of naysay jam bands added Tube to their repertoire after hearing this Tube. I know at least one Canadian jam band did, and it was just what a fun dance party, and they were firing on all cylinders.
Definitely. It's got everything. It starts funky. It's got stop-start jams. There's Trey digging into his harsh tone, which is getting a little bit more common in the second set and then would become more common throughout 2.0. It's elevated. There's new levels, lots of patience, syncopated jams. And then it gets cooled down about 9 minutes long. They awkwardly get back to the coda, the blues coda toward the end, about 9 minutes and 40 seconds. They could have gone on forever.
that was one of those tubes where it honestly felt like that was just obligatory. They just had to, like, oh yeah, right, we have to do that. Otherwise, they would have blown the stop sign on that blues jam and just kept it going. Because Fishman's a beast in this one. He's really sort of driving things along. That dirty, filthy Trey sound, which we first got a glimpse of during that Piper, and is going to come back in that gin. It's just so iconic. I would encourage anybody, if you're going to pick at this show, hit the tube for sure.
Yeah, agreed. And speaking of that gin, that's up next. And I think of February 2003 as the pinnacle of bathtub gin, kind of like 95, maybe fall 95 also has a reputation for great bathtub gins. The ratios are a little bit different though, because this tour was only 12 shows long and bathtub gin was only played 3 times, but all 3 times it's one of the best ever. Each one is listed on the Phish.net jam charts. And this one, I'm just going to read the jam chart description. Intense and highly improvisational jam with more of a rocking, propulsive, and edgy sentiment. In this way, similar to the 94-95 gins. In the final minutes, the band toys with the gin theme in a dark, twisted manner. I think that pretty much covers it all, but we have more to say because we were there.
Yeah, we sure do. Gin is one of those songs I just feel like the band, when they're getting warmed up from any time that they've taken time away and off, is still always there for them. The muscle memory, it even if you think back to 2021 that we've just gone through, some of those early gins is where they could really feel comfortable and kind of stretch their legs out and try new and different stuff. But this one in particular rides some big energy. Now there was a glow stick war. And you'll hear, I think it's in and around the 3 or 4 minute point. And I remembered this, and then I had to double check it. So I snuck on the internet and took a little peek at the YouTube video, but I was right. It was the glow stick catch. And so someone hucks a glow stick and Trey catches it. And then, big cheers, throws it back. And that just encourages, of course, more glow stick throwing. Now I have a mixed relationship with the glow sticks. As a musician, I can't imagine what it would be like to have that many people throwing shit at you all the time. Not only that, I got beamed with one of those like Ninja Star, throw ones at I think it was Oswego, and really hurt. So I have a glow stick bias. It's fun. It's great. I'd think better in an outdoor setting, but stop chucking them at the band, for God's sakes. Why that move? I've never understood it. I hate that Trey has to worry about that. But that being said, it does account for some, if you listen to the tape, some of the big swells and the big energy rises. And of course, we know that without those glow stick wars, then the band doesn't hear those swells. Without those swells, they don't kind of catch that wave that becomes the big improvisational jams that we love. But, you know, as far as the guitar itself, it is a kitchen sink jam in the best sense. You really can compartmentalize it into about 3 different suites, if you will. Some blissy, they pick up the pace at some point when they know they're going to run with it and they feel like they're going to run with it. And then, of course, Trey hits that whatever that sort of harmonizer pedal that he has to kind of twist up the theme and begin with, bending the notes. And I love when they do that. That's like,
me too.
That hits me in a spot every time. That's my kind of cronky wonky craziness.
After that was Friday, which is a necessary, straightforward ballad. Like they're really pacing this show very well. They know where to stick these ballads and these slower cool down songs. And this one got its share of hate in 2003 from myself as well. You know, I'm not immune. I'm not going to lie and rewrite my own personal Phish history. I kind of sighed. I would roll my eyes when they would start Friday. I don't know. It's not terrible listening back. I mean, my thought while listening to this show to talk about it is I think they could pull this song off now. I don't think that they could have pulled it off in 2.0.
That's funny. So Friday's fresh then, right? It's fresh off Round Room. It's Saturday and it's a funny callback because why isn't it Friday today? Let's do this all over again. You know, the lyrical content is there. It's not going to crack my top 10 Phish ballads of all time, but I was trying to meditate on this because we have different views on the 2.0, especially the Round Room stuff. Why do I love this song? I think I have some recency bias because it kind of lands with me as a dad right now. There's a very, childlike questioning song. Don't know whether I can't remember whether Tom wrote that or whether, but they're all becoming dads at that point. And I'm also a sucker for that when that E drops into the D and it's a key change, but it's just so seamless. And then Mike's got that very comforting tone. Yeah, it's a nice balm to kind of put on after the radiation burn you just got from that gin. And it's a 5-song second set. So you're going to get, a ballad. And it may not be your favorite, and it's going to be probably one of the more recent ones. But as we know, those more recent ones tend to grow on you. Like, I can't wait to hear my first Lonely Trip. I'm like so excited because that song is just warmed its way into my heart right now. I can't wait to cry my eyes out the first time I hear that live.
I'm with you. I mean, I heard it at the MSG run in April of this year. But I think the big difference, in addition to everything you said, and you kind of referred to this, is the maturity of the crowd, the age and maturity of the crowd. I don't know, all these childlike questions, or if they played Lonely Trip in 2003, I would make the same eye roll that I would for Friday. But hearing it now, knowing what Trey's been through, knowing the emotional weight that all 4 members of the band, and I would imagine 99% of the audience has gone through.
Yeah.
I think we're a little bit more accepting, although very vocal online about criticizing, because that's never going to change. But I think we're a little bit less apt to just dismiss a song entirely. I think that's kind of the timing for Friday was off. It was before its time.
I agree. That's a strong take. And then it's forgotten because we're about to get crushed by a giant Bowie.
Yeah, and as a fun, goofy intro this David Bowie does with strange prog noises. That's the best way I could think to define it. And then there's a standard composed section before they get to an evil jam around 8 minutes that's not unlike parts of the probably best Bowie ever of December 29th, 94. And then Fishman takes over a few minutes later. They really move in for the kill with this Bowie. They're deep in the show. They're deep in the set, and they are ready to really put a bow on this show.
Don't you miss the time when you had that sort of, is it Maze, is it Bowie, is it Maze, is it Bowie, is it Maze, is it Bowie, is it going to crush? I'm in the camp now for people for a louder Bowie. I want where is the Bowie songs? Where it's one of the last of the oldies to break out in the new era. Maybe this is the tour. Maybe we'll see it. But I agree. High praise comparing it to the 12/29/94.
Well, portions of the jam, not
portions of the jam. Yes, but yes, you're right. There's a darkness to it. They're clearly like no fear, reckless abandon. Every idea is a good idea. You can tell for sure. And then yeah, Johnny B. Fishman's just crushing it. Even like playing parts of his like untraditional parts of his kit, right? Like he's like hitting like, rim shots and like playing off it. Like, yeah, they're definitely feeling it. And then Trey goes back and forth between sort of that showing, he's still got the speed and the blaze, and then just wanting to make scrunky, rocky, dirty noises. And we were eating it up. Like that was, people will maybe not remember a time, but that was very new. And something that was talked about a lot afterwards in the lots and back in the hotel room.
What was?
Just Trey's new tone and the dirt and just, what does that represent? Where are we going to go with that? How is he doing that? That was the big question. All the gearheads are like, how is he making those noises?
And then he would push it to the extreme by the end of 2003 when they did their fall, the fall Thanksgiving run. And then 2004, it would just keep going until we barely knew what we were listening anymore.
Well, then it became a crutch, right? Then it became something that he could very easily hide behind. And unlike the effects these days, which arguably, I think not hiding behind is not the right word, but it's certainly, he'll lean on an effect if something's not going his way technically per se, or maybe that's just a hot take of mine. In these days, I think it matched perhaps some of the chaos that was going on internally within the man, as well as coming through his speaker externally.
And closing the second set is Bug. Although Bowie would have made a perfect set closer, I'm not complaining about Bug. It really grew in 2.0. One of the few songs that did, I think, aside from the newer material then, but it builds with perfect rock anthem dynamics, strong guitar solos, pretty good backing vocals here too, which wasn't always the case because they didn't practice as much in that era.
Yeah. Nice throwback to sort of my heaviest touring days in 99 and 2000 as well. Seen lots of Bugs. It's one of my favorite sing-alongs. They owed us nothing at this point. It could have been a 4-song set, but it was a nice sort of goodbye. Thank you for the weekend. I see it as, when the band plays that song, I see it as a hug to the crowd.
And to close the whole show, they went off, they came back on for the encore. Susie Greenberg, kind of a gift bag, a way to send everyone home happy. Yeah.
Here's a question for you. I'm going to interview the interviewer just for a second. Do you or do you not sing the Arrowhead Ranch horns when Susie Greenberg is played live or not?
In my head, I do.
Every time, right? It's almost it's almost impossible to extricate. Yeah. So, what a great Susie too. Like it's they maybe sound a little bit tired, but I think, as far as a Susie encore goes, what else are you going to do in 03? Send us home with a classic.
Right. And it's not just Workaday. Yeah, there's a huge sing-along like there is for this entire show, but also there's Stop Start Jamming, which gives Page like a real piano solo, not just kind of filler fun, which I don't mean that derisively, but like a real piano solo with clapping along from the crowd, again, at 4.5 minutes. And I don't know, things that like jazzy, kind of New Orleans second line style. It's not just your everyday Susie Greenberg, which we would have been just as pleased with anyway.
You're right. And at that point, we are euphoric. We are celebratory, and so too is the band. And that's why this one's getting the shout out.
Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining me on Attendance Bias today to talk about February 22nd, 2003 at the US Bank Arena in Cincinnati during Phish's first comeback tour of the few they would have over the course of their career. But, for me, at least, it holds a really special part in my heart as I was getting ready in college to get in my car and go all over the place and do improvisational trips. And Phish is playing here. Let's just get in the car and go. And then they went on hiatus right when I got there. So this represented something greater than the music. It represented this adventure. And it was wonderful to talk to someone who had a similar experience and had just as much or more to say about it than I did. So thank you for being here.
No, I appreciate that, Brian. I think 2.0 is one of those things that we're still unpacking in a lot of ways because we're still mining it. And I think that winter tour is just the best of what it was and what it could have been. And I think a lot of us sometimes just fast forward to the new times and the good times and just kind of sock our 2.0 memories away in a spot. But like people got to remember there was a lot of optimism and a lot of joy in those shows, and it shows, and it's worth dusting off every once in a while.
Thanks to Scott for today's interview, and now it is time for the attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
At the time of this February 22nd, 2003 show, the venue was called the U.S. Bank Arena. It is currently the Heritage Bank Center, a new name that was changed in 2019. When talking about snacks, I mentioned seeing the string cheese incident in Toronto. The date of that show was October 13th, 2003 at the Cool House in Toronto, my 21st birthday. In a nod to the Canadian venue, the band opened with Powderfinger by Neil Young and closed the second set with Tom Sawyer by Rush. My understanding of calendars was not at its best during today's conversation. Since the 21st was a Friday, it would only stand to reason that the show a week later at the Nassau Coliseum, February 28th, was also on a Friday. I suppose the two-night run gave Cincinnati the edge over Nassau at the time when my roommate and I were deciding which shows to hit and which shows to skip. According to Phish.net, the Weekapaw grew from this show is the first ever standalone version of that song. And finally, Scott emphasizes the length of Walls of the Cave played at this show. According to Phish.in, the track runs for 20 minutes and 47 seconds. The Phish.net Jam Charts describes the performance simply as, quote, extended Type 1 jam with building energy. Still, not bad for the song's fourth live outing. And that's it for today's episode. Thanks to Scott King for joining me today, Phish.net for its help with the fact check, and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. If you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show. You can do that by leaving a rating and a review of it on any podcast app, and especially by financially supporting the podcast at www.buymeacoffee.com/attendancebias. Every penny helps. Thank you so much again for listening, and I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.